This lesson is going to look at printers, and this is how do computers create physical objects, right? So if we print something out, that's one way that a computer can kind of tell us stuff. It can print out words or symbols or images on a page. So if we look at printers, there's a couple of everyday printer technologies that we look at. There's two main ones that you're going to use if you think about standard printer. It's probably one of these two. You've got inkjet, which sprays ink on a page. And then you've got laser, or sometimes called laser jet, which I'll be a little loose with my language here, but we'll say it melts solid, it melts powder onto a page. So if you ever have a printer that the pages come out warm or hot, like the copy machine downstairs in the school, or most copy machines, or if you have a printer at home that when it prints out things, it comes out warm, that's probably a laser printer, which is using a heating element to melt the toner onto the page. So let's talk about each of these individually, and then we'll talk about a couple other printing technologies. So inkjet, what you have with an inkjet printer is you basically have your piece of paper coming through the printer, and then on top of that, there would be a little box on a rail. And if you've ever opened up most printers, you can see this here. If you want to look in the staff room, you can go over and open that up and you can see this. But you basically have a box that moves left and right on top of the paper, and the paper slowly moves out as you print. And what happens is this box is an ink jet, so it's an ink jet, and it literally just sprays ink onto the page. So it sprays liquid ink onto the page. And it does this very similar to how screens work. It divides the page up into a bunch of pixels, and for each pixel it says how much of the different color ink should I spray, and then it moves along and sprays for each of those points. So it sprays, spray, 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 all the way across. Then it goes to the next line, spray, 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 all the way across, and continues doing this until you get your entire picture. The difference with how computer monitors work, for a screen, we give off colored light, RGB, red, green, and blue. But for ink, we have to use CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And this is kind of a physics reason. If you want to talk about more about the details, we can, but it's basically looking at the in-between tones of red, green, and blue, because the way that light is going to be bouncing off of it and hitting our photoreceptors as opposed to producing their own light. So we have to do a slightly different technology that we kind of flip things around compared to a screen, but it's the same idea. So with a screen, whereas turning everything on would produce white, for a printer, putting nothing out produces white. So everything's kind of flipped and reversed. But otherwise, it's the same idea. You're just spraying liquid ink onto a page. A laser printer, on the other hand, what it does is it has a drum inside. So it'll have a drum that'll look something like this. And what it does is it uses a laser. So it'll have a laser on a track like this. And that laser will slide back and forth just like the inkjet printer, but the laser will adds electric charge to the drum. So in other words, it prints electrons onto the drum. So it'll make, some sections of this drum be negative. So I might have a bunch of negative sections like this, and then a gap and some negative there. Then over here I might have some negative like this, then a gap over here. So it makes a bunch of places that are negative and a bunch of places that are therefore also the opposite charge. Then what you do is you run a piece of paper over this. Paper slides over drum and picks up charge. I'm vastly simplifying here, but this is the basic idea. So once you've charged the drum, then you have the paper run over that drum, and it'll make on that paper a bunch of places that are, negative lines of negative charge. Then toner sticks to charged places. So there's basically a powder that you can imagine kind of spraying over the paper or running, dipping it in the powder. How we get it on is a little more technical and complicated, but it's basically you spray it onto the paper. And wherever there was a charge on the paper, you'll have toner stick. And then finally, paper is heated. Toner melts, absorbed by paper. Absorbed by paper. And you can take a look at some videos or illustrations of this and you'll see it much more clear, but that's the idea. We charge a drum, we run a paper over it, the paper gets a charge, then we spray toner onto the paper. It's just a powder that's temporarily static, stuck to it, just like if you rub your rubber balloon on your hair and stick it to the wall. Same idea here, but before it can fall off or be brushed off, we heat the paper up. That causes the toner to melt and stick into the paper. There's some variations on it, but that's the general idea. The main difference that you're going to look between inkjet and a laser printer is inkjets can tend to be smaller, they can tend to be cheaper, but they'll take slightly more time. Laser printers tend to be more expensive, a little bit larger, but they tend to work faster. So that's kind of your trade-off there. Okay, a couple other interesting kinds of printers. We've got thermal printers, which use special paper that changes color when heated. So if you imagine you just heat certain areas, you can print colors and different things onto it. If you've seen the old from like the 90s accessory to the Game Boy printer, that used a thermal printer. It just heated different parts of the paper and caused them to change colors. A lot of receipt printers and like gas station receipts and like receipts from shops, a lot of those will use thermal printers. They have a special roll of paper that they put in and then it just heats up, but does the same thing as a laser jet otherwise. It just runs a little thing along, heats up the parts that need to go as it prints out. Impact or dot matrix printers. This is like the really old printers you can imagine where they would like kind of make lots of noise and you'd hear them like clack, 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 clack as they print it out. And if you looked closely, you'd see basically a bunch of dots making up your letters. So if you had a B, it would be something like this. And the way that these worked is they worked just like a typewriter. and they would have a roll of ink like this, and then they would just smack the ink and have it stick to the paper. And so then it would just run through and hit all the points that it wants ink to stick, and that would be the way that it works. This is something that's a little bit easier to demonstrate in person, so if you have questions about it, ask me about it in class. And then lastly, a 3D printer, this just creates 3D objects. So this uses some sort of material and produces 3D objects. Really briefly, I want to talk about the two types of 3D printers. The first is going to be extrusion. And this works by melting plastic or metal and slowly building the shape. So if you imagine wanting to print a cube, you could print the bottom layer by just laying out a line of molten plastic like this, right? Just running the print head back and forth and just oozing out some plastic. Then by the time you get to the end, the first part will dry and you can put another layer on top and just print out. I know it's hard to see, but you do that and you keep going and you eventually build up a bunch of layers, and that's where you can get a shape. And this can work with plastic or with metal or anything else that can melt and then re-solidify pretty easily. The other technology is resin, which solidifies a pool of liquid resin with lasers. So you can imagine in this case you've got a pool or a bucket with a bunch of liquid in it. And then if you shine a laser to just this exact point down here, you can make a little solid piece. Then you can shine another laser right above it and make another solid piece. And then maybe you go off to the side and you can make much more detailed objects this way because you can just shine exactly where you want that laser to be. And then you end up, eventually lifting this out. There's some other ones that are similar to this, but those are kind of the main two technologies. If you want to talk about any of them further, I'd be happy to talk about them in class.